Reason lives in language. Emmanuel Levinas, 1906 1995. In context, branch, ethics, approach, phenomenology. Before 1920s, Edmund Husserl explores our relationship to other human beings from a phenomenological perspective. 1920s, Austrian philosopher Martin Buber claims that meaning arises out of our relationship with others. After, from 1960, Levinas's work and relationships influences the thoughts of French feminist philosophers such as Lucy Irigaray and Julia Kristeva. From 1970, Levinas's ideas on responsibility influence psychotherapy. 2001, Jacques Derrida explores responsibility in relation to humanitarian questions such as political asylum. Levinas's ideas are most easily understood through looking at an example. Imagine that you're walking down the street on a cold winter evening and you see a beggar huddled in a doorway. She may not even be asking for change, but somehow you can't help feeling some obligation to respond to this stranger's need. You may choose to ignore her, but even if you do, something has already been communicated to you. The fact that this is a person who needs your help. Inevitable communication. Levinas was a Jew Lithuanian who lived through the Holocaust. He says that reason lives in language in Totality and Infinity, 1961. Explaining that language is the way that we communicate with others, even before we have started to speak. Whenever I see the face of another person, the fact that this is another human being and that I have responsibility for them is instantly communicated. I can turn away from this responsibility, but I cannot escape it. This is why reason arises out of the face-to-face relationships we have with other people. It is because we are faced by the needs of other human beings that we must offer justifications for our actions. Even if you do not give your change to the beggar, you find yourself having to justify your choice. Nothing else in our lives so disrupts our consciousness as an encounter with another person who, simply by being there, calls to us and asks us to account for ourselves. Excellent. That was the thought of Emmanuel Levinas. Now let's go to some history changes. And today's feature is Canada. The development of Canada, 1763-1914. By the 18th century, let me adjust this a bit. By the 18th century, the area now known as Canada was composed of two territories, the French province of New France, or Canada, on the St. Lawrence River, and British Nova Scotia on the Atlantic seaboard. After its victory over France in the 7 Years' War, 1756-1763, Britain took control of Canada, which it renamed the province of Quebec. Quebec's 6,500 strong population of French-speaking Roman Catholics were understandably fearful that Britain would force them to change their ways. To reassure them, the British Parliament passed the Quebec Act 1774, which guaranteed freedom of worship and allowed Quebec to maintain the French legal system. The act also significantly enlarged Quebec territory to include lands south of the Great Lakes. Thus, Canadian loyalty was secured at a time of increasing rebelliousness by the 13 British colonies. These proved invaluable to the British during the American Revolution, 1775-1783, when American forces besieging Quebec City found little support for their cause. Quebec divided. When the Americans won their independence, Britain was forced to surrender all of its land south of the Great Lakes to the newly formed USA, greatly reducing Quebec's territory. Quebec also changed demographically as some 50,000 American colonists who had remained loyal to Britain during the conflict fled northwards to Quebec and Nova Scotia, the ancestors of much of modern day Canada's English speaking community. Determined not to repeat the mistake it had made with the 13 colonies, Britain decided on a more sensitive approach to its administration of Quebec. The Constitutional Act of 1791 was an acknowledgement of the colonies by cultural nature and the desire of the English speakers to live under English and Protestant laws and institutions. The act divided Quebec into two parts: English speaking Upper Canada, modern Ontario, and French speaking Lower Canada, modern Quebec, under the authority of a British governor and an appointed legislative council. War of 1812. In the War of 1812 between the USA and Britain, the USA invaded Canada, briefly threatening the survival of Upper Canada before its forces were driven back. The wars threatened Canadian patriotism and reinforced the belief that Canada should remain independent and separate from the USA. It was the last aggressive act between the two countries. Further border changes were agreed peaceably, and by 1846, the US Canadian frontier had become permanently established. Expansion. Between 1775 and 1821, the Hudson's Bay Company, HBC, which owned much of Northeast Canada, and the Northwest Company, NWC of Montreal, fought for control of Canada's fur trade. The competition spurred an exploration of Canada's west as rival traders searched for new routes and suppliers. NWC fur traders Alexander Mackenzie, Simon Fraser, and David Thompson explored and mapped the Western territories as far as the Pacific and the Arctic Ocean. Between 1815 and 1850, huge numbers of English, Scots, and Irish immigrants flooded into British North America. By the 1840s, the population had reached around 1.5 million and, except in Lower Canada, was now vastly more British than French. Most settled in established colonies, but new ones were also founded. Scottish philanthropist Lord Selkirk set up the Red River Colony in 1812 in the central region. And in the far west, Vancouver Island, founded 1849, and British Columbia, founded 1858, formed a single colony, British Columbia, in 1866. Rebellion. In 1837, French-speaking revolutionaries in Lower Canada tried to overthrow British authority. In the same year, radicals in Upper Canada took up arms against British monarchical rule, demanding representative government. Both rebellions were quelled, but demonstrated that urgent need for constitutional reform to promote assimilation between the two communities. The Act of Union 1840 united Upper and Lower Canada into a single province of Canada, 1848. An elected legislature and was established. Although its location of seats between French and English-speaking parts became a further focus of discontent. Union. During the 1860s, Canadians suffered frequent border raids by Fenians, Irish Americans demanding Irish independence from Britain. They also felt threatened by the growing power of the USA to their south and its rapid westward expansion. The British and Canadians agreed that a federal union in the interests of security was the best answer, and in 1867, the British North America Act was passed. This united Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Quebec, and Ontario, the latter pair having reacquired their former names, into the Dominion of Canada with a constitution based on the British parliamentary system. The founders aimed to unite all the remaining British colonies to create a transcontinental nation. The purchase of Rupert's Land from the HBC in 1870 vastly extended Canadian territory in the northeast, and a new province of Manitoba was created there. By 1873, Manitoba, British Columbia, and Prince Edward Island had joined the new federation. The Canadian Pacific Railway, completed in 1885, played a crucial role in unification, linking British Columbia and the East, and promoting human settlement along its route. Canada's expansion continued into the 20th century as new settlers poured in from Eastern Europe and the USA. The provinces of Alberta and Saskatchewan were created in 1905, and in 1912, the remaining lands of the HBC were added to Quebec, Ontario, and Manitoba. That was it. Thank you so much for being back there, guys. It was a pleasant reading. See you soon. Amorcho.